It is
Hi,
recording now.
good afternoon, Sue. Jenny in California, and I'm in Phoenix. Um, this is our little interview with Mrs. Sue Lamb, who, with her husband and partner for Lamb and Lamb Associates, were the one of the core faculty members in the development of the fellowship curriculum and design, and involved with it for I think 60-70% of its 15-year life. Sue was very much invested in the program, and so was Howard, but also in the people in the program. And so we would like to capture those memories, experiences, and takeaways from that experience for the purposes of our book as well as our website. So Sue, it's wonderful to see you again.
Well, same here.
And I, without further ado, would like to go into our questions. One of the things that you, I think, are very, very good at, because you remember people and you remember, the things which are happening in the background to the program and curriculum itself. I think that was one of your strengths that you brought to the Lamb and Lamb team. I was wondering if we could take a moment and just talk about some of the things that just, flashes of memory or moments from the fellowship that stood out for you over the many years that you were involved with the program.
Well, the very first one that always comes to mind is from the very first year. And we were in Hiroshima, and I had never met anybody from Afghanistan before. I was absolutely intrigued with the friendliness, with the engaged way that so many of the Afghans had in terms of being so much themselves. And there was something about both the Afghans and all of the Pakistanis that I worked with. I remember Howard and I used to talk about Renaissance people. They so impressed me with the breadth and scope of all of their interests and their knowledge, their poetry, their music, their economic background. I mean, it was almost like they could talk about any topic with you. But I remember they had never seen, most of them in that first group had, I don't think any of them had ever really worked with the internet before. And I remember one of the professors from Kabul Polytech University taught biology. And we had a speaker who was helping them understand how you could use the internet. And everybody was just staring up at the screen. And I was sort of standing next to this gentleman. And I said, why don't you ask a question? And he was a little bit intimidated. I said, what are you interested in? And he said, the origins of biology. I said, ask that. So he asked the question, and I will never forget his face when he saw page after page after page of resources that were now accessible to him.
Right.
And up until that time, he had never, I don't think, had resources other than old Russian textbooks and lectures.
Right.
And this entire new world was open for him. So that was one of the exciting things.
I remember this instance, and what was fascinating in that whole computer and internet access thing was that the Afghans were all, many of them were engineers, and they were familiar with using engineering software. But because the country had been closed to the outside world, internet was just this mind-blowing opportunity, right?
It
Which opened
really
up.
was. It really was. And it made me appreciate the resources we have so much more, seeing it through their eyes. So that was one of the first things. And that same year, I think one of the things that so impacted me was going to the Peace Museum and being with the Afghans during that, and understanding that here was Japan and its ability to totally rise again after all of the devastation. And I think that had a particular impact, a positive impact on the Afghans
Mhm.
who were just getting over so many, 3 decades of war
Right.
and devastation. And so there was a hopefulness around that. So those are some of the things that
Mhm.
I think about first. And then going when we went to Kabul the
Mhm.
second year,
Mhm.
I was so excited because by this time we had some connections, and so many of the people who were now our friends said, "We want you to come and visit and see us." And when we got there, of course, we were very restrained because this was at the time when I think it was just 1 year after the UN, 2 people had been killed on Chicken Street. So we were very restrained.
Uh-huh.
And so my impressions of Kabul were very, we lived in a guarded compound with wire on the top of the walls and really did not get to go much of any place.
Mhm.
And it was such an impact on me to see how dusty and drought ridden and bullet marked the
Mhm.
whole city was.
Mhm.
So I had been expecting something so different.
Mhm. Mhm.
So that was disappointing. And yet it was such a sense of, oh my, here I am in Kabul.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
it's the whole sense. I think one of the big things for me in terms of overall impressions was the privilege of being able to work so closely and have such intimate relationships with people from the other side of the world.
Mhm. 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 Yeah.
Of course, I could go on, but I don't know if you want me to just
No,
keep.
no, I think this is lovely because it kind of gives us a sense of the sentiment that both ways that people had. I mean, the reaching out to each other and trying to understand each other. I think that is one of the things which framed the fellowship.
Yeah, I think one other thing I would say to Humera is that the whole sense of and I'm sure you've already talked with other people about the projects,
Mhm.
but the whole sense that every Afghan fellow
Mhm.
committed to a
Mhm.
project year by year. And so for Howard and me, there was that sense of remotely
Mhm.
having a role in
Mhm.
helping to
Mhm.
revitalize a
Mhm.
country.
Right, right,
And the diversity of the projects were just amazing. So
right. In terms of the training itself, when we were doing the training, what were some of the pedagogical challenges, or and you?
simultaneous translation.
Ah,
So, the whole thing of not knowing what is being said
uh-huh.
and hoping that it's accurate and then waiting for that to come back.
Right.
And again, that whole sense of not really knowing the culture.
Yeah, yeah.
So even the language, being very careful about not using idiomatic language, trying to explain things very simply.
Uh-huh.
So those come to mind first.
Sure.
And then I think also we didn't have any background
Mhm.
about
Mhm.
who the people were. I mean,
Mhm.
we had respect for them,
Mhm.
but we really didn't know anything about who it was we were involved with
Right, right.
until
Yeah.
later in the program.
Right, right, right. That is true because at that time we did not have any presence. UNITAR did not have a footprint in Kabul to screen the participants
Right.
themselves, and so we had to rely on other partner agencies.
Yeah.
So we met our fellows for the first time when they came. Actually,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah, that's true. Jenny, do you have any follow-up questions to any of this before we?
Yeah, actually, I think it was really interesting for the simultaneous translation part because I think maybe some more clarification on that. So what was it like? So did the fellows not what was their English language ability like? And then how was the process of delivering your training?
Well,
More of detail.
it was uneven, Jenny. I mean, there were some people who understood very well and
Mhm.
spoke quite good English,
Mhm.
and then there were others who didn't.
Mhm. Mhm.
So in some senses
Mhm.
that made it even more challenging because, you know, if everybody's at one level, you can move with the appropriate pace. But in
Right.
this case, I think there were times when probably for some of the fellows, it was a little bit tedious for
Yeah.
them to have to sit through the translation and then to the Afghans and then back to the instructors. So I guess in one sense we could say they learned it very well because they were hearing it
Twice over.
more
Yes.
than once.
Yes.
But
We must, you remember our fellow who was the most helpful in this was Mr. Hakeem Gul Ahmadi.
Hakeem,
And
oh,
yes,
Hakeem,
yes.
yes.
He, you know, so they were, for the purposes of Jenny and the thing was that most people spoke many languages in the group, but not everybody spoke fluent English.
Right.
But Hakeem Gul Ahmadi did. And so the poor guy, he was very, very generous because he was there to learn himself, but he volunteered to be the translator while Howard and Sue were talking. And
Yes.
so, and he was not a professional interpreter.
No.
So anyway, but yes, it was, I think what was quite significant was the commitment of the trainers and the trainees to make this happen, right? Because it was tedious. All training sessions became double the time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one just personal note of admiration around Hakeem was what he did after the fellowship and built and opened many schools. I don't know how many, but several schools for women,
Right. Right.
girls and women around Afghanistan.
Yeah, that was one of his projects, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you was that, you know, you and Howard made some very specific contributions to the design of the program. And I am curious to know your philosophy behind the insistence on those things. One of them was, of course, you know, the elements about organizational needs assessments and organizational development, but also the concept of, you know, retapping the resources that you create. So the coaching and the, you know, the not letting the community go once the training was done. Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy behind it and what you think its impact was on the fellowship?
Well, I think, you know, Howard's and my background is as organization development consultants. And so we bring to that work a certain, I guess, set of values and philosophy. One would be that it is so important to develop the system that you're working with, as opposed to just offering expert help of some kind. And so we were aware that I'm going to go with the need the projects first. We were aware that some of the fellows were just deciding what they should do as a project with a particular system, as opposed to getting input from the system itself as to what was needed. So that was the first thing that we thought about, was how important it was to ask those people at different levels in the system, what is it in an organization, whatever the organization is, what is it that you think is needed?
Right.
Since we have this opportunity to do a project. Now, it doesn't mean that the organization always knows, but you certainly want to get the input and work in a collaborative way, as opposed to saying, well, I'm here and we're going to fix this or that. So I think that was a major philosophical approach that we brought to it.
Right.
And I also think what we would call experiential learning is very key to us, as opposed to didactic learning. And so we were always very conscious of how is it that we got people to do their learning, as opposed to we taught them something. So there was a lot of, I guess I would say, experimentation, exploration, using your own wisdom to guide you, as opposed to thinking that only the experts have something to teach you. So I think that was a big piece of it. And I think that some of the ways that, well, the coaches, for example, we knew you had to build in that kind of internal capability or the program would die, because it was not going to be funded forever.
Yeah.
So having that whole notion of how do we help the system develop its own ways of surviving, hopefully ad infinitum.
Right.
And then just specific kinds of, like what they had enthusiasm for, like developing the glossary of terms that they would then have a resource that they didn't have before. So those kinds of, we really were very excited about how many creative ideas and ways that people in the program had when they were encouraged to develop it for themselves and for those who are going to come after them, as opposed to the experts coming in and having it all together.
Right. With reference to the glossaries, I just want to add that you're talking about how you involve the fellows in developing some of the handouts with specific reference to Afghanistan during the program itself. And I think the wonderful thing was that they really felt they owned it, because they kept updating them over the years. And so, that was actually a very, very useful tool also in terms of getting people invested in what they were doing.
I think one other thing I would mention is I remember whenever we got involved in the projects, I can remember feeling the pressure, like, oh, we've got to get this done in a certain amount of time. And I would have to slow myself down and remember, ask questions, ask them, what is it they think they need to do?
Right.
So they were my client too, or Howard's client.
Right.
And we needed to do the same thing with them that we were encouraging them to do with their organizational clients.
The one for me, one of the signatures of the fellowship was the blended learning thing, right? So half of it was just 70% of it was distance learning, 30% was on site. In a time when there were not a lot of distance learning options, and even less in Afghanistan, right? Even we in the US were not savvy. I mean, Skype came on even much later. To do video conferencing, we had to be on a particular platform or app, which everybody was on. So we had to travel physically to places to do it. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts, especially when you compare it to the current environment, where you are only on Zoom.
Well, look at us right now. I mean,
yes.
Just hit a button and we're there. When we started, we were going to the World Bank, Washington, D.C., and we had to be there by 5:30 in the morning. And half the time, the arrangements for letting us in weren't quite up to par.
There's a lot of security, yes.
And so just even that, just think of, we would travel, about half an hour in the dark, and then go in the building when we get in. And we would see, it was a beautiful, clear screen. So we could see people very, very well and hear them well. But there was, and I can't remember his name, there was just one gentleman who was so wonderful about working with us and supporting.
Nayur Iqbal.
Yes. Yeah. And so that in itself, I mean, that was a monthly journey. And when you just compare that, that would take us, at least by the time we were there, did the thing, got home again, it would take 3 hours.
Yeah.
And now we hit a button and we're on anywhere in the world.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
So that was one of the most difficult aspects of it.
Yes. And for the Afghans, I mean, many people traveled from the cities from other provinces, to Kabul to participate in those sessions. And, sometimes there were traffic jams on the way, there were bomb blasts on the way, but people made it.
Yes.
And,
it was not, I remember a lot of people traveled through very difficult, challenging, unsafe
yes,
kinds of journeys to get there, to be on those calls.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that, of course, in blended learning, it helps if you've met each other at least once in person.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
But the thing is that hats off to the commitment of the people to the process, because it's hard to stay engaged with each other when you don't see each other for sometimes the whole cycle, sometimes for months. But the effort that was made to make the human connection in addition to the knowledge connection, I think.
Yeah, one of the things, this is a question for you, but I've always assumed that when we went to project teams, that created more communication and coordination in between sessions. And that was in itself a good intervention in terms of creating community. Yeah,
you're right. So we scheduled for them local sessions as well as audio sessions with their international mentors. So every month they were required to meet with each other. I mean, they could meet more than once, but minimal once. So the team would get together, do their homework, be ready for the session with the mentors. Yes.
Yeah, and while we're on that, a fun memory just came up. We've already said that most of them had never done anything with the internet. And they did not, for almost at least the first few years, most of them had not done PowerPoint presentations at the beginning. And I remember one project team bowling Howard and me over with their PowerPoint presentation by the end of the first year that they had ever used them.
Right.
I think that happened for a lot of folks.
Yes, of course. And now, I mean, and they're all young, of course, as well, but they are more savvy than anybody else. Yeah.
Well, I think that anybody who had any contact with any of the fellows could sense the commitment, the resilience, the way that they were so dedicated to bringing their country to a different perspective, to a different position. And so everybody was touched by that. That everybody then wanted to be contributing in their way.
Yeah. I was just wondering if you want to give some final thoughts on your takeaway from the whole experience, the relationships that you formed with the Afghans and others. What was your final takeaway? You, and if you want to mention any of Howard's thoughts as well, that would be great.
Well, I think for both of us, it was truly one of the very top experiences of our lives because of it was exotic. It was so exotic to begin with for us. And then the depth of the connections that we made and knowing that these people were making such incredible progress in their own, there was just such a sense of, in just the smallest ways, being able to support something that was so much bigger than we were. And, every year Howard and I tried, while we were very physically, mentally, and emotionally capable of doing so, we tried to have at least one pro bono project that was local and one that was international. And so for us, all those years that we were with the Afghans was such a sense of being able to do something that was important to us, that we could see incredible progress being made right before our eyes every year, everything getting that much better. And the gratitude and appreciation both ways, not just one way, but us and them, as all of our close connections from them. There was just so much growing. Growing of all kinds. And, and whenever, you know, I don't get to talk about the experience that much. Whenever I do get to mention it, people are like, wow, you were there. And it takes me back too. I'm like, yeah, I was. So, you know, we felt very, very appreciative and privileged to have that.
Yeah.